Well, here we have the latest harvest of bird scooters in my apartment. Questionable endeavor at best, uh, in particular because bird scooters are some of the worst designed, worst assembled, and worst maintained that I've seen. Fully 75% of the scooters that I harvest capture each night have some kind of damage, some kind of defect, some reason why they're unrideable or unsafe or both. This one here in particular, model ID 7PUJ1, is pretty typical. You can see that the only thing really holding these together is a couple of bolts in the front and the back of the shaft at the steering bearing, and then another pair of bolts on either side where the handlebar attaches to the shaft. And invariably, because none of these bolts were installed with Loctite or any type of torque, and because of the way they're designed, there's a lot of stress that gets put on the shaft when the braking is applied. These bolts come loose, and so you get a real wobbly shaft. So you get something like this. It's a little hard to do on my own, but you can just sort of see that's the deflection of the shaft. I'm not moving the wheel. This is the bottom staying still, and this is how much play there is. So you can imagine if you're riding along and you apply the brake and suddenly it shifts forward like that, you could pitch forward, lose control, wreck. Let's see, let's check a couple of others. That's probably one of the worst tonight, but let's see how the others are doing here. Model A6 HMT. This one actually I already tightened up, so I have a set of security nut drivers, which these take. This is a kit. They're used because most people don't have them, but the majority of the bottom bolts, such as these at the base of the stem, takes this particular nut driver. It's has a hole in the middle. It's called a security Torx bit, and this in particular is a T27 size, which are most that are used on the bottom. The ones on the top are sometimes T27, but usually T25, slightly different. You often see, as with this one, that it's completely missing the kickstand. They're made out of very cheap forged aluminum, which I find snaps off in quite a few of these scooters. Let's check out a couple other of these and see how they're doing as far as stability. This one's not too bad. This one you can see how loose the stem bolts are here. Just a lot of play. This is an older model. It has a much different design. It has a clamp down on the bottom. Often these are missing bolts entirely. This one's actually not too bad. Here we go with IDDB6ZS. Again, you see It's a little hard to capture on video, but just that's really the play in the wobbly, unstable status. Generally, I'd say a lot of these are not safe, and the real problem is because of birds' system of how they service these scooters. For example, I released a couple of damaged birds that are missing their electronics pod, this device here on top, which you can see, which is where the electronics are and the GPS tracking system. You'll find a large percentage of the scooters are missing these pods because they've been vandalized and they're easily removed. They're just plastic shells on top of the handlebars. It doesn't take a lot of effort or ingenuity to take a hammer and smash them off and remove them from the stem. So then you'll see them with wires hanging out. So then they're not trackable, not really usable. I released a couple of those 6 days ago at 2024-0, and yesterday they were still sitting there waiting for a mechanic to pick them up. And these are birds that were lost, damaged, missing. I don't get the sense that they really care too much about them, that they consider these disposable items, and that once they've made a small profit off of their initial investment of each one, if they're lost or vandalized or hoarded in an apartment building in Southeast, they just don't really care too much about it. So when it comes to these wobbly scooters, you can imagine if it takes a week for someone to pick up a scooter that's entirely missing its pod and needs severe, some intensive service. I don't really get the sense that the other birds are getting any sort of regular maintenance. So just out of my own sense of just decency, I will spend a few minutes tightening up these bolts, as you can see here. Let's see how many turns it takes. 1, 2 for that one. 1, 2 for this one. Sometimes these bolts will be missing entirely. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. That should improve that a bit, but you can still see that on this one there's still a large deflection. The bearings on this one are really worn out. It's hard to impress upon you how unsafe this bird is. I wouldn't ride it. And then I'll try to tighten these up, even though this is not exactly the right bit. I can wedge the T27 into the T25 bolt and get a little torque on it and tighten it up somewhat, just so that the next poor person who tries to rent and ride this isn't falling over their head. Onto the ground because of poorly maintained scooters. So that's a little better, but this one's actually in pretty bad shape, this 7PUJ1. So I'm going to mark it as damaged on the app. We'll see if that actually gets any service, although I can't keep track of it when I'm doing 10 birds a night and I can't follow up with them. All I know is that from what I see, 3 out of 4 birds out on the street are missing bolts, have loose bolts, have damaged steering shafts, missing kickstands, missing their pods. It's pretty much a fleet of trash as far as I can tell, and I don't really get the sense that the company really cares. So that's what I have to say about bird scooters tonight. If you ride them, ride at your own peril.